So I just want to give you a quick demo of the power of the built-in tools for modern browsers now. I'm going to use Chrome to do this because I like the built-in Chrome tools. I'm going to use the Gruyere application to demonstrate this. The Gruyere application is one of the applications that is set up live, it's online, and it's there for you to experiment and hack with, essentially. Now we're not really going to hack it, we're just going to use that as a basis for functional testing, and as we do that we're going to see vulnerabilities and the kind of things that testers would do. So this is really an exploratory test session where I'm going to use the tools to augment my testing. So that you've got all the instructions for Gruyere on here if you want at the google-gruyere.appspot.com. So you basically create your own instance of Gruyere, or start your own instance of Gruyere. It creates one for you. So I'm going to use my session. Now, I'm not even going to get into what the functionality of this app is. I'm just going to focus on the most basic stuff. So I can see that there are some user accounts in here. Well, by the way, because this is exploratory testing, normally I'd make a lot of notes. Instead, I'm just going to talk about what I can see and we'll try and remember it. This is the kind of thing I'll do if I'm mentoring testers or teaching them. I'll pair with them and we'll go through things in this kind of fashion. So this is essentially a pairing session with just you and me. So we've got a couple of users here. I can see there's a Cheddar Mac user. They have a user ID down here. You can see it. I assume that's a user ID. And I can't move the mouse down to show you, but that's the cheddar cheese one. And homepage for Brie is Brie, so I'm assuming that's the user ID. So the first thing we're going to do, I can go home. I can't really do anything. This is my home. So I'm going to sign up as a new user. So before I do anything here, let's investigate what this form is. So the inbuilt functionality lets me inspect elements. So now I can see the stuff on the page. So I've got a DOM browser in here. And I can see a form. Now this is interesting because the form is a get. And normally you'd expect a form, a particular sign-up form, to be a post. So that's pretty much a bug. That's going to work in our favor in terms of doing security testing. So that's a vulnerability, but it's also a bug. You'd flag that as a functional bug because you're expecting a post to be the thing that's going to change the values in there. So I can inspect the DOM, I can see the various values that are going to be sent through in terms of a UID and a is author. Now what I'm interested in, because this is a hidden field, if I change that, and I could change that in here now, presumably there's an admin functionality. I could change this in the DOM and do is admin, and it might set me up as admin. Let's just start with the normal functionality now though and say is author true. I don't know what this LP checked is, but presume I could change this. The good thing about the inbuilt tools is I can change anything in the DOM. I mean, I could even go in here and use someone else's Gruyere instance, but I'm not going to do that. So the inspect functionality is very useful. I can change things in the DOM. So without even submitting requests, I don't have to breakpoint requests in order to change them. I can change them in the actual DOM itself and then submit them normally through the browser. Because remember, this is the kind of stuff that we would previously have had to use a proxy to do. We'd have to breakpoint it, then change the message, then send it through. But because the modern browsers now allow us to inspect the DOM and amend it, it's a lot easier to do certain types of functionality. So let's just create a user by start. Let's make sure the network stuff is on though, because I haven't got that switched on. So what I need to do is set this up to capture. So I'm going to preserve the log upon navigation. I think that's an important thing to do. Let's refresh this page. So now we can see network traffic is being captured. So I'm going to sign up as Bob with the password Bob, because that's how secure we are, and create this account. Now if I hadn't inspected the form, then I would see in here the request being made. Again, this is the kind of thing that you'd have to use a proxy to do in the past, but now we've got the network tab built in. All the browsers have this kind of functionality. You've already seen it there for Firefox. Opera does a very similar thing. And I can see that this is a get method. If I hadn't inspected the form, here I can see from the network traffic that it's a get. But even if I wasn't using network traffic, I can see up here in the URL that it's a get, because this is clearly the kind of URL that you build for a get rather than a post, because all the parameters are in here in the URL. So I can see the actual parameters in here with the action new, the user ID, and the password. And just seeing this stuff, I've seen it in the form when I inspected it, I can see it here in the request, I can see it up here. I'm starting to think about the risks, because remember, technical testing isn't just the tools, it's our understanding of the technology. Now we know with HTTP that we've got get, post, delete, a whole bunch of other requests that we could submit. We're using a get here, which is not what you normally use. But gets are really easy for us to manipulate and change with the browser. I can just type in a new get here and submit that request. If it's a post, it's kind of hard for me to re-simulate in a browser. I could probably do it by amending the form, but with a get, it's easy. I can just repeat that request. And there you go, I've repeated the request. It tells me user already exists. Again, this is the kind of thing that you would normally do in a proxy, where you would replay the request. Because it's a get, I can do it straight here in the browser. But looking at this, I'm thinking now with a technical, not even a technical, with a testing perspective. If I manipulate these parameters, something different might happen. So the action might be delete, action might be amend. There's a whole bunch of actions that I could probably put in here and change it. And I will use that as part of my testing, because I'm observing what's going on. I can inspect it and go down into real detail and see the actual parameters and information that's going through. And I've got two different ways of observing the traffic. I can see it here in the URL, and I can see it here in the network. And I can inspect using the Elements tab. I can interrogate and go real down into detail in this request. So there's a few testing possibilities in here, but what I want to also check is, now that I've logged in or signed up, have I got any cookies? So I'm going to look in the resources here at cookies. There we go. So I've got a cookie in here. So this is interesting because I've got the, presumably that's a session number. I've got I assume that's the user ID and not the name. And then I've got my user type or something else that tells me I'm an author. And we saw that isAuthor is set up here to true, and we saw in the form that isAuthor was a hidden field. So I don't know whether doing something as simple as changing the cookie will change my state. Now, out of the box with the resources and the cookies, all I can do is refresh and delete. So I know that there's a technique I want to use, which is amending the cookie, but the tool that I've got doesn't support that out of the box. Fortunately, we can add extensions to Chrome. So I've got one installed already up here, a cookie editing tool, but if I didn't, I would know that there's a technique I want for editing cookies. I will go and find a tool to help me do that. Now, if I can't do a plugin in the browser, I will drop down to a proxy, which will let me amend the request and change the cookie on the fly. Fact is, I can now build it into the browser so I can do it here. But remember, in the past we were looking at what comes first, the tool or technique. Well, here I've already got the tool, so I know I can do it. I found this tool because I know there's a technique I want to use. There's an approach I want to take, so I find a tool to do it. So by learning about the technology, the fact that browsers and web applications use cookies, so that technology information, that technical information, the notion that I understand cookies, leads me to then evaluate the use of the cookie in the application, then leads me to how can I observe that, which I can do through the browser now. Here, how can I interrogate this information, and how can I manipulate it? Well, I have to do a plugin in order to manipulate it. So let's manipulate it. So this is it here, author. I'm going to change that to admin, see what happens. I'll submit the cookie change. Let's get rid of that. Let's do a refresh here. Yep, that's it changed. So let me do a refresh on the browser, and so it's saying user already exists because we've got that. So that's kind of a mistake. Let me do the home. But I'm no longer logged in as that user. So maybe this isn't a state cookie. Maybe it's some sort of key. I don't know. I'm testing, so I'm learning. I'm experimenting and seeing what's going on. So let me change this back from admin to author. That's what it was. Now, normally I'd be making a lot of notes on this and I wouldn't have to remember what it was before, but because I'm talking about it rather than writing it down, I have to remember. So let's refresh again, and we're logged in again. So maybe that's the whole thing about getting an account back. Maybe that's part of the key. I don't know. I already know that if I repeat this request with the new, that the user already exists. So what we're going to try and do is see if we can amend that. So I'm going to try and amend that and say Bob and say is, I'm going to try and do is admin true and invalid request. So I'm not sure exactly what was invalid there, but it's not taking that forward. Let me change that to author, put it back to author, see if that helps. No, so I think it doesn't like the amend. So I guess the thing to do then is to just have a quick look around and see what other functionality we've got. So we've got the profile there. If I scroll down, so there's the get to retrieve the, that's not the get to retrieve the profile. There it is. Edit profile. So presumably it's doing the edit profile from the cookie because I haven't passed anything in the URL. So that's interesting. It might be that there's a vulnerability there about being able to view other people's profile if we just change the cookie information. So we could try that. We could actually try that because we already know that there's a person called Bree. So let's see if that works. So I'm assuming they're an author, as I am. I'll change this to Bree, submit the cookies. Then let's resubmit this page. And it's saying user ID not logged in. So presumably that session ID, I'm assuming now that that's a session ID, is quite important and is associated with the actual person. So let me change that back to Bob. Edit profile. So you can see that I'm able to experiment and change the messages that are going back and forwards just in the browser here. So let's have a look at this form. So I'm going to inspect this form before I submit it. And again, this is a form that's going to do some updates, but it's a get, which makes our life as testers easier, but that's bad for the application and the security. And you can see that it's got an update. So I used amend previously, but this is actually an update. So what I'm going to do is amend this so that instead of being new, it says update. And I'll keep everything else the same, maintain as an author, and see what happens. So it's saying incorrect password. Now I know that's the correct password, but if we have a look at the form, let's have a look here. I suspect what it really means is not incorrect password, but simply the fact that we've only supplied one password. When I do an update, which is what this form does, there's two password fields, one of which is PW, and that's what we added in. The other one, so PW is the new password, and we need an old password presumably for an update. So I'm getting this information from just inspecting the form here, just interrogating what's going on. So I can see the old PW. So what I'm going to do is amend this URL so I'm no longer passing in the password. So I'm basically saying update where the user ID is Bob and the is author is true. Let's see what happens. So it's done, it hasn't complained, so presumably it's done an update, but hasn't actually updated anything because we didn't change anything. So let's do that again. With an update. And the user ID of Bob. Let's take out the password. Now this would be a little bit easier in a proxy because I would be sending a request, and now at this point the request would be in front of me and I could just amend it in a form. But we're doing it in the browser. I'm going to change this to is admin. Remember, two ways I could do this. I'm going to do it with the URL here, but I could have done it by changing the DOM in the form in the first place that had for signing up, because I'm trying this in an update. So let's change this to is admin, see what happens. And it's accepted the request, but nothing seems to have changed. So let's see. Well, there might be a couple of reasons for that. So in resources, we've still got our cookie here set to author. So I'm going to change that and see if changing that to admin makes a difference. Let's see what happens. Do a refresh. Yep, that didn't work in terms of the home. So let's change that back to author. Now clearly I haven't understood the technicality behind this. I'm messing about. I don't really know how this system works. So let's make sure that we're still logged in. So I'm going to sign out, then sign back in again as Bob. Log in, see what happens. So now look at the cookie. So we've got a different session, which you'd expect. We've got Bob and we've got admin. So that missing field was admin and author. So maybe there's it shows you the different roles that you can have, and we now have this admin functionality for manage this server. So we have the benefit that there are a lot of bugs in here because it's designed for security testing. But normally you'd be using a proxy server to do all this. The fact is, the modern browsers are getting more and more powerful and allowing us to do the kind of testing we would normally do in a proxy itself in the browser. So I encourage you to explore the functionality, the web developer functionality that you get from your browser. So here, all the functionality that I used was resources, looking at the cookie, using the URL, which you can do in any browser, looking at the network traffic to see the requests. That's very useful. And I remember I set it on to preserve log upon navigation so it wasn't cleared between each page load. And I was inspecting the DOM, and I didn't actually do any changes in the DOM, but I could have done. I could make changes in the DOM to actually impact the application. So hopefully that gives you some idea now of the power of the modern browsers for helping us test, for augmenting our testing. But it's not the knowledge of the tool that helped me. It was the knowledge of the tool. It was the knowledge of the HTTP technology, the fact that there's posts and gets, that led me to think in certain ways. The knowledge about just testing in general, for knowing that I want to change the URLs that are passing in. That's a common way of testing to force bugs through. I know that I want to manipulate the data that's going through and back and forwards. I know that I want to observe. I know that the technology behind the cookies and leads me to finding more tools that will help me. All these things work together. It's hard to know exactly where to start in that mismatch of where to learn. So just essentially learn everything that you possibly could. So if you haven't, if say you're coming to this new, you do an inspect, you don't even know what body tag is. You're going to look it up. You're going to start learning HTML because you're observing things that are going on, because you're interrogating the page that's in there. You're going to use network, then you're going to see the headers. If you don't know what the difference between a get header is, a get request, then you're going to look it up. This is going to start teaching you, or you're going to use this to teach yourself and investigate, because it's very important that we continue to learn and look things up. Now I could have saved myself a whole bunch of time by going to speak to the developer and ask them what's going on, or read the instructions for this application, but I'm exploring and learning and manipulating, interrogating the thing that's going on, observing the traffic, observing the URLs, observing whatever is in place, thinking about it, reflecting on what's happening, then making decisions about what to do next. Now, if I was doing this properly, I'd be making a lot of notes to support me, but I am recording this, so I can look back at my recording and see what was happening, because that's one way of observing what's going on with my test sessions. I can record them. Now, the good thing about Chrome, I'm just going to quickly show you this. In the network tab, I can select a bunch of requests, and I can output them as a HAR file, an HTTP archive file. If you don't know what that is, now is the good time to look it up. It's the kind of thing that you associate with proxies, an HTTP archive file. But the Chrome browser supports that. So I'm not going to go into any more depth in this tool, but I did want to show you it in action in the context of testing, so you can see what a technical exploratory test session looks like just with the browser, pretty much just with out-of-the-box functionality on the browser. And you can see that I almost didn't need the cookie amendment because I was able to do a lot with the URL. So I hope that helps put things into context a little bit.